Do you have the ability to play audio from a browser or something?
I should.
So since it's doing system sounds, you can probably just play it on your browser and just pick it up, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So while I'm talking, you can assemble that playlist I was talking about.
Okay, so start the stream.
Hmm.
And stream is started.
So I guess, do we actually have somebody in here already?
Don't know.
We should double check that I can hear myself. I can. We have somebody by the name of Other Viewer.
Huh.
Okay, so I do have some notes as to what I want to talk about. I guess the first thing is we had a friend of ours email us and actually ask um, what specific artists I was interested in terms of the Turkish stuff. So there's three artists that I was. I don't have all of them on loop right now. I only have one song. I believe it'll be the first song. I'll actually play it during the break because it's hard to figure out what is legally streamable because theoretically speaking, Twitch allows streaming for quite a lot of stuff, but it has a process where it mutes it after the fact. Um, that doesn't mean it's okay, but the if the particular stuff that I'm going to present, I'll try to do it for the break. Would be um, stuff that's recorded acoustic and that isn't like officially published and is a cover of somebody else. And so it's not like an official label thing or anything like that. So I think the first couple will be two or three will be safe to just stream the audio wise. So it shouldn't be a big deal. And if we learn that it's a big deal, then that's the learning experience. And it's not something that I think we're going to do very regularly.
Oh, okay, so
Um,
wait, so you want
mhm.
the music you sent over to be played?
Well, okay, so I mentioned the Discord. I gave you a list
Okay.
of the videos, and you will build a playlist. And during one of our breaks, hopefully the first break, you'll just play that playlist. Just making sure that the very first video, just making sure that the order is correct.
Oh, okay.
And it doesn't have to be video, it can be just audio. Although she's pretty, so they're all pretty. So what am I saying? Um, so that's yeah, hopefully that's something you can work on while I'm chatting. Um,
Mm,
one of the concerns that we had was being prompted for things to talk about. And I mean, you were musing that the internet's a big place and somebody somewhere must have had some random conversation prompt tool out there. And I don't know if you want to desperately look around um, for something like that, because that would be kind of hilarious. I actually have this thing where I have a there's a concept called a writing prompt. So for aspiring authors, and I'm actually not sure because I've listened because I've been interested in writing for some time now, and I've listened to what actual for a job writers do in terms of staying sharp, keeping in practice kind of stuff. I've never heard one of them talk about doing random writing prompts. I've only heard about them insisting on reading a lot or on if they're working on content, writing even if they're not in the mood and writing even though a lot of their stuff's going to be thrown away, which is still a really offensive concept for me. Um, is it Stephen King is the horror writer? He's known for that. He insists on writing 5 pages a day, and that man can hammer books out really fast. Like he's shocking, and doesn't mean it's any good necessarily, but he's got a lot of winners under his belt, including stuff that's been converted for the big screen that people will recognize, but also for TV shows as well, if I'm not mistaken. And just the idea of writing 5 pages a day, even though most of that's going to be going to never make it anywhere, not even into a draft. Just that idea is just strange. So the writing prompt idea is very similar to some sort of conversation prompt. A writing prompt idea would be like um, some random reader. So you might have an audience of some readers, and they would all kind of collaborate and come up with some wacky writing prompt. And it would be, well, tell a story about X, and to prompt a writer to just fulfill that wish. And sometimes it's a bit of a not quite a competition, but you get a whole lot of people trying to use that writing prompt. So you might have a prompt of the day, something like that. And I had been, because of the nature of the way I write, I had been writing with a kind of writing prompt idea in mind because I have what's the what's the man, I made my own terminology and I can't even remember my own stuff. It's like you have a snowballing cannon that you're creating while writing, where the previous writing actually becomes a writing prompt for future writing. And it's really obvious, at least to me, when I'm doing that. And I think if I describe that particularly well, I could make that obvious for other writers. And I once wrote a I can't call them short stories because I don't actually necessarily give them good story arcs and lots of characters and stuff like that. Because a good short story is the foundation of a movie. Because that's I mean, it doesn't turn into that. It has to turn into a script and all this sort of stuff. But there are some rather popular movies that just started as short stories. And so I made a thing, I just call it world building, and I just went, "Well, orange," and and it just started writing, and, that's a writing prompt notion where you just pick an object in the room you're in and write a story, and maybe you can integrate that into the first sentence, or maybe that is the primary focus, or maybe that's something that's important to one of the characters. It's a way of getting nudged um, into the avalanche of the rest of the piece. And so the notion of doing a podcast and finding some sort of speaking prompt is something that I'm capable of going down that same kind of mindset as long as there is some sort of prompt. So theoretically speaking, if there was a tool that just went random writing prompt, I could probably talk about that thing. So Minion, if you want to take a note for in the future writing prompts, that phrase will get you thousands of results. So that might be something to pursue as a tool in our toolkit for future episodes, or maybe for after the break or something like that, if things peter out. So make a note of that. Um, okay, so for something because I actually did write some things between this and the previous show, and of all things, okay, so I gotta ask you because maybe I'm going mental, but it's been a long time, and I've been using the exact same kind of shampoo for, like, many, many years, and it's Head& and Shoulders, and I decided to look at the back label for once because 'cause it's been a long time, and I've actually read it before, and I like following the directions, so they I mean, who better to give you advice on how to use a product than the actual manufacturer, and I like documentation. And so I was reading it, and there's no longer a reference to uh, soak time, to waiting time. And shampoo used to be like, oh, shampoo, like massage it in and then wait for 3 minutes or something like that. It was an incredible inconvenience. And I've been acting a certain way with that in mind. I've been showering a certain way all these years. And I looked at the label and it doesn't have any mention of that anymore. So, like, I have to ask you, Has technology changed? Is that not a thing anymore?
No idea, I never read those things.
I wonder if it's just if the technology changed, it got improved. Maybe it's my product that changed.
It
Maybe that
might
was a
have, they might have
conditioner
added
thing.
a faster ingredient, they might have added something that works faster.
I guess. I mean, I've always felt bad in the past of just like rubbing it in and then rinsing it out right away and not caring. And I've been being better. Used to kind of like apply it to my, in my case, my scalp, and then um, the- showering the rest of me and not and leaving it on my head for as long as possible. But apparently, I don't have to do that. So I mean, that's kind of weird to discover. And maybe I just need to look at other products. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I used to use a 2-in-1 or something weird like that. You know, they have 3-in-1s now with like it's for your head and your body. It's like an anything wash. Um, I'm waiting for it to also become toothpaste as well, so you can like do all the stuff in the shower all at the same time.
And that doesn't seem possible.
Teeth, hair, body, what it's all kind of around. It's just, it'll be brought out for men. It'll be like mint flavored shampoo. I There probably are some weird people that would be into that experiment. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, and actually that would be something that under other circumstances we would literally just look up, like go to head. There's probably a headandshoulders.com or something. But I do want to talk about uh, how I'm not sure how to approach this topic because it does get into edgy territory. Um, it's okay. So this internet thing has has normies on it all over it, and that term, um, the term normie generally applies to everyday um, people that don't. I, I don't even know how to describe it anymore because it's basically everybody. But if and so it's not really much of a descriptor or an insult or anything like that. It's just like it's mom on Facebook is just a normal person. The thing is the internet wasn't made with any of these people either in mind. Um, there's a lot of underlying philosophy that has really deeply influenced where things came from. So there's a kind of a foundation that's stuck around. And all regular everyday citizens started using this internet thing. But what it was before that was uh it's not like it was like the internet was exclusive or anything. It's just where all the nerds went because like the regular world was not like the nerdy kid gets pushed away from all the cool kid activities, goes off, does their own hobby, like the model railroad or whatever the heck. And that'll be all poo-pooed by the high school students kind of thing. There's some nerd club or other, right? But this internet thing was like that, except it became popular. And all those people came here. So they're like extra nerdy corners in the internet that the normal people just keep invading and keep invading. And everything gets normified. And there's something like that I want to talk about that's it's very similar to that because the internet can't it does not presently that's being changed. The internet does not presently understand the nature of the human that's interacting with it. It doesn't categorize or sort people. It's usually it the service a person is using on the internet kind of pretends like it asks like what your age is or something like that. It asks for your participation, but there's no way for it to for any particular site or service or whatever to actually confirm whether that person's telling the truth. And it's not it's not like a running joke or anything, but it's like, are you 18 or over? And it's like a little kid can just go, yeah, okay. It's like me looking through my Steam games, and there are some games that are graphic violence because, right, there are games for all audiences. Some of them are adult, so it'll ask you for your date of birth. And even I wouldn't be lying by giving my date of birth, but I go like, yeah, I was born January 1st, 1900, and just like, go away, let me in. But there's no confirmation there. And all of the internet is like that, where there's n unless you're brushing up against some really serious financial stuff, there is no mechanism in place to actually authorize you until you get into checkmark land. Like Twitter, you can send like you if you meet some minimum standard, you can provide real world documentation, a proof of identity, and get some sort of verification thing on there. And that's usually necessary for either like Twitter does the blue check mark. And that's considered a kind of that is actually kind of a rank because there is a filter that says, I don't want to hear anything that non check marks say. There's actually a setting in Twitter for that. So there's another class of citizen on Twitter with that. And there is for YouTube, for example, if you wanted to get involved with their advertising side of things, so if you wanted to monetize your work, there are all kinds of requirements to qualify for that. So there is, I think it's you have to have 1,000 subscribers, and then I think it's something like 1,000 hours of watch time in the last month or 30 days or something like that. And I'm not sure how that rolls over. And I might be wrong on that. And it doesn't actually work out in reality like that because the you can apply for it and then when they get around to looking at your application, because I'm guessing a human is attached to that at some point. It might be 3 months later, right? And your situation might change in 3 months. So there are people that have more than 1,000 subscribers, and they still haven't had any response. So they might have had a kind of really nice um, progression for their channel, and it just continued going. And then YouTube just doesn't care until they get around to caring. Anyhow, so I was talking about the verification concept that kind of applies under certain circumstances, but generally it doesn't. And so because there's no verification, everything is like flattened down to everyday citizen. So access to everyday people. And there's nothing wrong with that, except everyday people also is including unsupervised children. And a 17-year-old is not an adult, or it's generally speaking, like this is kind of a problem too, because a lot of this is America. And so they will consider 18. A lot of places will end up using that number, even though that's not an official number for all places on earth, because the internet is all places. So you could even say just English speaking internet. But even English speaking internet, that number isn't the same everywhere. So I know in Canada that's the number, but even in the United States, it might be like when is adulthood? Because you can get a driver's license, or you can drink, or you can smoke, or some other um, restricted activity might not be that age. So, but so the internet kind of get flattened out to this one kind of concept, and because accessibility just by default also includes the young, let's just say the non-adults, everything gets pulled down to that like it don't consider it an insult, but to that lowest common denominator. So because nothing really gets authorized at all, everything ends up being pulled down from the realm of adulthood or the realm of nerd stuff uh, out to accessibility to how young can you get, because there are kids that are quite young. But you can imagine a 13-year-old is on level playing on a level playing field with a 30-year-old. And so the services have to tune themselves to be accessible to the 13-year-old, even if it asks the 13-year-old if the 13-year-old's an adult, and that person will just lie if that's what gets them into the thing that they want to participate in. And because there is this flattening of the internet, because there's no verification, because there's a huge audience, everything gets pulled down. And there's this kind of big tech mommying that happens. And it's been infecting everything everywhere. And it made me think, like, how is it possible to have, in the face of all of this, an adult area where adults can be adults, because adults in the real world act a certain way. And the internet, even though there are adults on the internet interacting with other adults, even though they might all be check marks, they might all be verified as adults, they don't act like adults. They act still in the same arena, uh, not just being there, all the participants are aware that there are young eyes, because moderating oneself down for an audience, to keep the audience pretty broad, like to be youth friendly is the phrase I like doing. It's one thing to bring for all the participants in like a public conversation to bring it down to be youth friendly, but it's another thing when the participants act like non-adults, not necessarily like children, but boy, are there a lot of elements that are just childish. And so you see interactions online that are just dragged down to this, you might say something like muck raking, but there's a lot of just it's basically
Muckraking?
insanity. Muck raking. You don't know that term?
No.
No. Okay, so it's probably from like keeping pigs from what would you like, herding pork. What would the term be actually?
What?
It is like mm, like raking through the mud of your um, your animals essentially to kind of clean it, smooth it out, kind of thing. Muck raking is. I'm going to make you look that up because I don't understand it well enough to explain it off the top of my head, but it's an old term.
Okay.
It's probably like an 1800s term. Sorry, but there's a lot
Muck.
of
Oh, right. So, the action of searching on publicizing scandalous information about famous people in an unhanded. I don't think that's what you were looking for.
no. Okay, well, that's close. That happens too.
Mm, a muckraking journalist. No.
Well, there are a lot of people that so there are character attacks and stuff like that that happen that just don't happen in the adult world. And I don't, well, we would say that the adult world being real life with adults without the young present, or even with the young present, adults just wouldn't act the way they do, like they do now online. And it's kind of a problem. So
No, I
you've
think
got,
they would.
hmm?
Wait, they
Like, I
wouldn't.
mean, it's perfectly possible, but you've got a lot of adults that are acting like complete idiot like children, especially when they're heated with one another. And the argument I wanted to make was it wasn't that just that happens, and I can talk about you distance and stuff like that doing that. Um, but what I did want to mention is what ends up happening is all the services that everybody is using now. it pulls down for the quote unquote safety of the lowest common denominator. So everybody is becoming subject to rules that really only apply to non-adults, to 17 and under, or whatever, however you want to visualize it, to high school students and younger. So adults are now being subject to rules and are being forcefully pulled down, moderated down um, almost, I don't know how to explain it, but there is no quote unquote safe space for adults to be adult because the internet is so open and unverified. So the notion of verification leading directly to adult only areas, that hasn't started happening. And maybe it won't ever, but there are slowly coming to be more and more adult websites that don't care about the flash and the addiction of the current mainstream tech stuff. So they don't necessarily care to be as all inclusive as Facebook or as ridiculous as Twitter. They're not Instagram, they're not YouTube. But there's, even with them, they want to have all audiences. Are we out of We're not out of time, are we? No, we got plenty of time, yeah.
What?
I'm just trying to think of how much time I have left to rant about this particular topic.
Like 36,
Okay,
26
mm,
minutes?
that's what I want to hear. I'm losing track of time when I ramble on. So, um, there, the I have not heard anywhere on the internet that both verifies the audience as well as restricts unverified audience members and considers age. And there's never been a notion of um,
Unless you like
having.
consider,
Hmm?
unless you physically verified everybody in person, like
No,
don't
well, I mean, you can ask for ID and stuff, but yeah, you're
again that
right. It's hard.
unless you're watching a live view, you might as well just do a Photoshop of it.
Well, I'm sure there are ways to skirt around a lot of these problems, but some of it might be a combination of credit card related stuff, so actual money transactions as proof of identity, and that might just be good enough. But at least there would be some standard possible as a means of entry. But the that constraint of audience, as well as completely excluding everybody, all unverified people, would allow, let's say, the terms of service to be moved from protective of children to appropriate for adults. Because I've never seen terms of service that actually make basic statements of freedoms that adults enjoy in the real world. So ideas like you shouldn't insult somebody, right? Like no hate mobs or no, like, those rules don't mean anything to adults in the real world. It's there are crimes, and that you could make a version of the criminal code for, let's call it, the host's country, so maybe the United States, and just be like, well, you don't even have to have very many rules in your terms of service or your rules and regulations or your moderation stuff. You can just point at the criminal justice code and just go, "You're a person is held to three standards essentially. Maybe you can argue for another, but one is the legal codes of the hosting country. So if the corporation that owns the and runs the services in the United States, then those laws apply. Then the second one would be the equivalent in the user's country, because you can't break your country's laws just because you're using some service in another country. And the third would be if you've got your if you're you have certain legal obligations because of your employment, for example. You might be held to certain contractual obligations. If you're doing something at work, then you have your own code of ethics or whatever from your employer. Um, and there's all kinds of subtleties like certain people on Twitter have been held accountable as being possible representatives of the company that they work for because they have made those employees statements in their Twitter profile. So they might be giving personal opinion, but but because of the structure that they've set out, they they present themselves too much like a representative of their company, and the company gets pissed off at things they say, so they have to retract and all. There's been problems. So there's there's 3 levels of legality essentially that would exist, and they don't you don't need to have terms of service that covers any of these things. You can just flatly say you're subject to those things. And you don't have to like the host terms of service doesn't have to say anything other than those like 3 sentences that describes these 3 things. They don't have to cite all of the laws in every country on earth. They don't have to make their own version of stuff. And they don't have to somehow craft some internet mommy thing geared towards children because they don't have any. So they don't need some special exceptions for a new class of user. I've never seen a space on the internet that takes that approach like that. Um, it's because nobody wants to have because as you said, I mean, how are you going to verify everybody? That's a lot of work. You have to charge each person for that stuff. For a human being has to do that work, so that human being has to get paid for that work. So you would charge each applicant um, to have have their ID processed, etc. Um, so it just bothers me that the internet is now being mommied down into this waiting pool, and the kind of challenging, I don't mean like edgy or anything like that, but there are conversations that are like apolitical that are difficult. Like everyday life for adults is difficult by default. And too many people enter the online space as kids growing up with the internet, becoming adults on the internet, thinking that the internet is life and expecting the same youthful comforts to also be presented online, and they really are, and they never have the difficult explanations. They can't be put online. They kind of have to be hidden in little corners, and they're hard to see, hard to find, they're hard to participate with. They're never going to be the popular things. So if you're just poking around YouTube, you're not going to get that stuff as recommended videos. You're going to get the broad audience stuff because broad audiences are what advertising gets put on. The host gets paid to present those recommendations. You know, the more eyeballs on those ads, more money they make. They gotta pay their own bills. You don't have to think of them as being greedy. YouTube prob YouTube might be YouTube might have been turning a profit around about now, except YouTube's advertising has faltered very, very badly for various reasons. Um, that it's the profitability of YouTube is it's I don't it's being kept afloat by outside forces floating it as a service because it would be valuable one day. And I think
YouTube would be valuable one day, isn't it? Somewhat is.
well, it's not profitable right now. See, the idea was so YouTube, so Google used to be its the head umbrella entity, and it purchased YouTube, and YouTube was running at a loss. It's horribly unprofitable. It still is because it's a terrible idea. It's providing free bandwidth, a massive amount, and it's not charging anybody anything, and it doesn't make much money off of advertising. And the idea was they bought it up because it was growing popular because of the piracy of music on it, and it cut a bunch of deals over the years to let that still be kind of okay, and it cracked down in bits and pieces while the music industry shifted to itself become hosted on YouTube. So you're going to see like Vivo channels for all kinds of different artists kind of popping up. And but there was a time before that, and where you could recognize that there was a value in YouTube, but it was crazy expensive to operate. So Google just pushed in a lot, like, because Google, the search engine, and they had some other services at the time. It was quite profitable, so they had the money to do it. And the idea was they would operate YouTube at an incredible loss, and that eventually that service would become profitable because of they'd maintain an increased popularity, they'd insert advertising, they et cetera, et cetera. And this was actually true. They were starting to become profitable, even though they were using the, the quality of videos was increasing. There used to be a 10-minute hard limit on video uploads. The maximum used to be 480p, and now it's just more than 4K. I know there's 4K. I don't think there's 8K. Hope not. But
There's
those
talks
videos are,
about it, but
yeah.
nobody's gonna
But
see
those
more
are,
than 4K.
I mean, my eyes
Most
can't do
people
4K.
won't see more than 4K.
Yeah, so but those physical disk space size and bandwidth differences between the old, what we would consider postage stamp size stuff, and now the difference is staggering. And even though costs have gone down, they've really dropped for all this stuff. You I mean, the prices have gone down, but their usage has gone up. So, I mean, they're still running at a loss, or they were for a long time. But their advancements in how they do advertising has overcome those problems, and the advertising was threatening to maybe almost get around to paying for all that ridiculous cost. And they still wouldn't be making up for all of the expenses for all of the history right from their original purchase, including the purchase price. They still haven't paid all that debt off essentially, but that curve of profit was just starting to come in, and they got hit by a bunch of problems with advertising, and some pretty deep problems with advertising, namely advertising um, fairly youth oriented advertisements on videos that were um, not directly geared towards the youth, or the reverse, fairly adult advertisements being put on videos that the youth were assumed to be watching. And there's a lot of nonsense there where how do you define, you can't know who watches any video ever, and you can't know who the audience of a video is. So they started like doing the Steam thing, which is, hey, do you the uploader, do you think your video is targeted towards minors? And the video author is like, well, and it like, does a minor appear in the video? Then it must be targeted towards minors. Like, that's how they decide things, and that's not how reality necessarily works. Um, anyhow, they the possibility for YouTube turning a profit went away, and it might not recover for a little bit of time. So it's still running at an incredible loss. And the advertising stuff has really damaged its. I, like, I don't know why YouTube still exists. I mean, I don't, as a from a purely business perspective, I would have sunk the project, but they held on to it because it represents something of a monopoly in its particular field. And if it can get around to being made profitable, then it will be worth it, in the even if it takes a longer run than was expected. It will eventually become um, it. It's like I there is no parallel anymore because every other thing on the internet has some kind of competition. Um, so I can't say something like it would be like owning Steam. But Steam no longer has a as much of a foothold on. It's not exclusive really anymore. YouTube thinks well, whenever somebody thinks about monopolies, people don't really quite understand monopolies when they're looking at the internet. Because theoretically speaking, Twitter is a monopoly in its environment, and YouTube is, and Facebook is, and there might be some minor thing that gets touted as being competition, quote unquote competition, but it's not like Vimeo is competition for YouTube. It's just its own thing over there. So technically speaking, YouTube running at a loss eventually because of its basic monopolistic um, foothold, it it can set the stage for it can own a significant part of a chunk of industry essentially, and it would be worth it for the very long run for them to essentially own the game because nobody else can step in and just become another YouTube. A lot of people have tried, and there are actually good alternatives to YouTube that just use fundamentally different technology to overcome problems of bandwidth, for example, because you can do some really weird swarm streaming blockchain esque oddities that I don't fully understand. But it's possible. It's just not possible with high bandwidth, high quality. Uh, yeah, so YouTube is really quite unique in where it is. Vimeo has to charge money. I mean, I've got some stuff on Vimeo, and and so they have limitations on what they would provide for free. Um, and then you pay for I think both disk space and bandwidth are concerns of theirs. And I think that you would pay, X amount of a month for to upgrade that package, so to speak. But that's perfectly reasonable. I mean, I have to pay for my hosting for the exact same thing. But Vimeo is quite cheap in terms of its bandwidth, but YouTube's free. I mean, YouTube you can upload incredibly horrifically large uh, in terms of disk space. Uh, the original quality of your videos might be incredible, and YouTube will just keep the original for forever and provide every single other resolution of your video and stream it all to potentially millions of people, all for free. It's ridiculous. Um, so it's basically the only game in town, and if it's the one that can cater towards all the advertising, etc.,
Well,
then
aren't they recovering some of the money from ads? Oh, actually, then again, it's not enough, but it's a bit.
well, yeah. But so the question is whether or not they're actually turning a profit yet. Again, so because they got hit by a bunch of advertisers pulling out because of the problem of the inappropriate matching of advertising and target audiences to the content of the videos. And so a lot of artificial intelligence analysis of videos is being done, and there are attempts to analyze entire channels, to ask the authors of the videos to try to match things together a little bit better. And it's an absolute disaster because the first problem, well, the first problem that happened is there are probably unsupervised many, who knows how many, right? Because we don't have that information because YouTube does not share. But there are uncountable numbers of probably unsupervised kids who produce content. And again, uh, unaudited by their parents or by any adult who produce content. And the the there are actual legal changes in the United States that put pressure on some things. And YouTube's response was to have an algorithm study videos and lock down videos that are produced by the youth, all youth, supervised or not, and remove the ability for them to be commented on or voted on or anything. And a lot of this is I mean, this is suicidal for YouTube. If it, not like they have a choice, but it's suicidal because all these kids they want community and validation from making videos. And there used to be response videos as a thing, and that's not a thing anymore. Hasn't been a thing for a long time. And so there's no
That
real
was
conversation.
almost. Oh, that was a bit over a decade, I think.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
A decade and a
And
half or so, I think. Actually, now that I think about it.
and I mean there are reasons for removing it. They're invalid reasons, but whatever. And so that isn't a thing. So they're it's not like they're losing that. They're not, but there are still like tags, not like the comma separated tags list with text. I mean, there's a concept of tag in a video where you tag a couple of friends, which is you do a thing, you perform an act, you video it, and then you tag a few friends, which is like, hey, I want you to make a video on this topic too. And and so they would like chain out to tag one another and talk in that kind of way. And now they can't quite communicate like that anymore because YouTube removed the ability to even contact the author of a channel. It's just the feature was removed. So the author of the channel has to provide like their social media links or their email in their about page. There's no communications forms within YouTube anymore. So you can't do that. Um, and these youths can't comment on one another's videos. So they're just kind of like locked down. And that same sort of state exists for a whole lot of other videos, depending on if a person is logged in or not because they're flagged as, because there's adult, like you must be logged in to see this lingerie ad or whatever, right? Because that's adult. That exists as a class of stuff where you have to go, yes, I opt in to see adult material by, and you log. There's like people that watch YouTube on like a TV when they're not logged in. They'll never see certain content. They can't interact with certain content. They just won't be. They will never be recommended as certain classes of video. So things are a little bit wacky. But your comment was on um, whether or not YouTube is kind of starting to maybe almost turn a profit with advertising. I mean, maybe they are again. They certainly were really damaged by advertisers pulling out and for legal changes. Um, they are they're a gigantic target because they're also an effective monopoly on whatever the heck you want to call YouTube. Um, and so a lot of eyeballs have been on YouTube. They've got a big target on their back, and it's a bit of a shame that things have been eroded. But again, my there's no equivalent of YouTube where you don't have all these ridiculous uh, constraints anymore. Where adults can just like where you have conversation that's ridiculous and unmoderated. um, where they're not being beaten down by weird terms of services that are interpreted vaguely and all this kind of. So I've got a. It is an oppressive um, environment to step away from coffee shop banter or like a park bench conversation into an online space when that online space is acting as though your random entities having a conversation in like a grade school playground, and it mutates all of the conversation in certain ways where perfectly normal adults end up becoming uh, like children in at recess, just and the value, the quality of the experiences um, is just off. It's just wrong. It's not it's not even like that. There's some really weird specific culture that has started um, coming out of nowhere, out of the internet, especially over the last, I mean, you could say 5 years, but I've seen it happening. I mean, I was there since before this internet thing was popular. So I've seen this erosion like from day one. And technically speaking, I'm one of the people that was an outsider that came in that started changing things, right? So um, conversation went from like live text chatting through open channels to mailing lists to forums to now we do conversation in podcast and audio form and in video form. And I was there as part of the slow transformation. Um, and the problem is this new stuff has no it. mm, yeah, it's I think it's a problem of exclusivity. Um, anyhow, so this is our break coming up.
Yeah, just roughly perfect.
Okay,
Roughly.
so do you have the ability to play the audio or optionally the video of
I can play the
the
audio. The video, I'd have to do a bunch of things in order for it to be
yeah.
focused on it, so no.
Okay, so like pressing F11. But yeah, so
Mm,
that's something you can practice for next time. So play the audio and let's
and we're back. Or I'm back. Don't know about him. Maybe still muted.
just making sure that I mute the stream. So yeah, we'll have to figure out that playlist. Um, I wish I could pronounce her name, but I can't. Anyway,
What language is it?
that's Turkish.
Nope, don't know Turkey.
You don't? You can learn Turkish.
Eh,
If I had girls as pretty as those, I'd learn Turkish.
there's girls
If I
pretty
had
in
any.
any. There's
Uh,
girls pretty in any language.
yeah, well, okay, it's like it's the nature of people or something. Um, That's actually it's strange because I learned a little bit of Swedish because one girl was really pretty, and I learned a bit of French because one girl was pretty. It's like it's a motivator for me. It's not like I can learn 100% of the language, but I mean, I know how to. It's strange. It's strange. I don't learn phrases or anything like it falls out of my head after a little while, but I learned some of the like for example, some of the Turkish stuff I'll just put on loop and listen for half hour easy,
Only half
and
an
it's
hour?
well half an hour every day for months, but yeah, yeah.
I could put something on
Um,
loop and drown it out.
the thing is, because it's in a different language, it's a combination of being really alluring to listen to and really hard to mentally play like sing along to kind of thing. So a piece of my brain is constantly being pulled to it. So it's good for just kind of like random, well, the version of Zazen meditation called walking meditation. And having a piece of the mind uh, half challenged, it lets the rest of the mind go and do whatever the heck. And I need that for my brain to have a certain kind of mental state if I'm gonna go and ponder over other things. It being a foreign language is is rather weird because I'd like to have the lyrics like memorized in my head so that when I'm paying attention, I can kind of like sing along in my head, so to speak. But it just doesn't happen for so much of it. It's very strange. Um, but but yeah, I mean, but it's nice. I mean, I do this with a lot of different foreign language music. And again, I don't have enough. Well, there's a lot in the world. So yeah, it's there's a bubble that English speakers end up being trapped in for a lot of things. So, for example, that's just music. Movies is another one. You have, as an English speaker, the quote unquote all of the good movies are in English, right? But that's also because we don't get any of the none of the other stuff, like the rest of the world. There's a lot in the rest of the world. None of that, um, none of that ever gets played in our theaters. For example, none of that makes
Most,
it here.
well, most of it barely gets played. There was one good Korean film, Parasite, that got played here
Yeah,
recently that I've heard about it, haven't seen it yet.
yeah. Well, I mean that exactly. So there might be some stuff sometimes. Once you get into those sort of snooty moviegoers who they think more broadly than the English constraints, they start talking about, well, and I've collected some of these, right? And you go and it's I mean it's really hard if you're trying to buy a DVD overseas in a different language. I think life gets a little complicated, but there are you have to imagine that if somebody somewhere curates a list of some topic of movies and they mention something that's in a foreign language, it's probably good, right? It's probably good or very good. Maybe it's like best in class from that country, from that language, from the era. Um, and it's very much like yesterday or last show when I was talking about the the equivalent in music with the Taylor Swift equivalent. Well, there's something like that for movies, but movies you can have a kind of pop music version for movies, pop movie stuff, but that tends to not float overseas over into different languages. Maybe it'll get dubbed if it's like Japanese animations will do that kind of thing. But the vast majority of actual serious live action people movies, if it's just bubblegum nonsense, like the filler garbage, it might make a it makes people a fine living, and it's art and it's serious movies, but it's not of the caliber that would float over into English, even in those lists of stuff, right? So the stuff that does float over tends to be quite the cream of the crop. And some of it's just really weird. So for example, I'm really big into science fictiony stuff. And if you want to get into science fiction and really broaden things, you start getting into like Soviet era science fiction stuff. So it's like 1980s. Um, so you have to imagine that gritty level of technology, but it's in the Soviet Union or it's in like Poland or something like that from that era. And so it's got an utterly alien perspective. And a lot of movies in the era kind of have to sneak around some of the rules, some of the problems, the social problems in producing art. And so they tend to do some really interesting, sneaky stuff that makes it a fun watch, an interesting watch after the fact, especially if you know some of the political environment that was going on at the time. And so there is quite a lot of really quite fascinating science fiction in particular, because technology was a really big interest in at that time in those places. And the same is true if you want to go through like get good romance movies or something like that in another language. I've got like German is a great language to get a couple of some really nice dramas and romance and stuff like that. But knowing knowing their names, knowing the titles, finding lists that include stuff like this, it's actually quite challenging unless you go after it very directly and you get break out your translators. Now that we have that kind of thing, so remember back in the day we didn't have that sort of stuff. But now you can Google Translate or the equivalent, and you can go after like the top 100 movies of all time in and pick your language.
Well,
And you
generally,
can,
then generally they're translated for you.
well, if you're using an online translator, then and that will at least give you some of the titles, and you can kind of poke around, get the original versions, get the titles, get the dates, figure out who the popular actors are for whatever the heck. And that's not quite the same as stuff that ends up being curated by the experts in English language movies who will say things like, well, if you're really into science fiction, you probably ought to check out there's oh man, it was a Polish movie. You and I made you watch it. It's a Polish movie where a couple of average guys get put in cryo and wake up hundreds of years
Oh,
in the future. It's called Sex Mission. It's all one word, but it is a play on, and I believe that's the word, that's the title in Polish, and it's a play on the fact that they're basically the only men, and it's a really hairy man chested kind of movie. So it's it's weird and it's funny and it's Polish and it's from that era. So it's all manner of odd. So that's one of the movies that wouldn't make it in a top list in Poland, but it makes it out for English speakers for a particular class of movie because it's so interesting. And there's a lot of stuff like that. That's the stuff you want if you're looking for foreign language movies. You want curated by English language specialists because it might just be obscure failures in those countries at those times. But here it wouldn't be the equivalent of a cult classic because it's like technically speaking, the original Evil Dead was a cult classic, but it had additional movies made because of that. Um, but if I wanted to, there, I've got an interesting collection of stuff. So if you ever look at the Criterion collection, I've got a chunk of that stuff. I have a habit that when I get something, I'll get the most extra special edition version of a, in this case, DVDs. I stopped collecting by the time Blu-rays came out, and um, so for that, at least for the special edition stuff, and so I've got like I'm trying to think of the movie called Naked, and it's it's really obscure and really challenging to watch. I probably should watch it again. It does involve some nudity. It is not sexual, not really. Anyhow, getting stuff. There's a difference between cult classics in English and the imported, highly recommended, curated for a really niche audience stuff that you get. So um, it's a bit of a shame that it's difficult to find foreign language stuff because there must be really good stuff out there. Um, One thing to really keep an eye on is because I think I maintain that there was a writer strike in the United States, and I don't know any of the details, but I do remember that the quality of all writing seemed to just go away after that. And movies just started being remakes and they started being garbage. Um, and the original universe stuff, like original intellectual property stuff, uh, started. It's now a trickle, and so you get a lot of remakes. And one thing to pay attention to is if there's a movie out there and you learn that it is a remake of a foreign language movie, go and look at the foreign language one. So, for example, um, yeah, I don't recommend you watch this because it's a very difficult watch. But there's one movie called The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and it's an adult movie. So you have to be more than just a person that's over 17 to watch it. You need to have an adult mind to deal with it because it's a challenging movie. It is a remake of a foreign language film. I can't remember what language it is. It's like, I don't think it's Swedish. It might be. It's in that general area. And you'll actually recognize one of the actors in it as being like the professor dude in like the Thor series of movies. And I can't remember his name. Don't ask me. Um, but he's in it. And it is maybe I'm thinking of a different movie. I think that's the correct movie. Anyhow, there are some really difficult movies, and they get remade into adequate English language movies, and you might never know that they're a remake. So, um, the the best example I have that I can recommend without hurting your brain is ooh, Nikita. It's called La Femme Nikita. Um, it is a It was originally French. Well, okay, not obviously if you don't know French. So, um, La Femme Nikita did end up being remade in English. It even got a TV series. Neither are particularly good. The original in French is something else. And if you like gritty semi-spy movie, like it's I don't even know how to describe it. It really is in a class all its own. And there's movie after movie after movie. And if you need to go and find out where a movie comes from, especially if it's really hyped, if it's really big budget. And as soon as you learn that it's a remake of something foreign, it doesn't mean anything about how good the English version is going to be because it's often just it's trash. It could be trash for various reasons. Who knows? It could be amazing. It could be better. I am far too frequently disappointed compared to
Well,
the quote unquote lower budget foreign language version.
here's an outlier, sort of. Have you heard of the TV show called Suits?
Yes, actually, it's pretty good.
So that was a copy based. That was based on a same name, based on something that was done in Korea. They changed a few of
Really?
the aspects. Yeah, it's a copy from Korea.
So it's just kind of carried over.
Yeah, it's Americanized essentially.
That that might actually be worth watching. Um, I I can't say that I'm a fan of Korean stuff, particularly because their music has just poisoned the well. Um,
What?
but I do have some. So poisoning the well. I'll explain that after.
How did it poison the
Um,
well? Is what I'm saying.
Korean music. Korean music is pretty awful. Just pop music. K-pop is awful. And so
Oh
watching a lot of
boy.
foreign language media and the language ends up being abrasive, unnecessarily so. So it just negatively biases me. But I do have at least one, maybe more than one, really hard science fictiony stuff out of Korea. Oh man, it's so good. It's so good. Um, so futuristic science fictiony. I know one is it's a cop movie. It's a future cop movie. It's the old um androids going bad cop movie kind of thing. Um and it's rather spectacular because it properly presents how a modified robot-y type thing can how dangerous one of those can be, like a militarized cyborg type thing, how properly dangerous one of those can be. Um, so it was a beautifully done movie, and there's another one that's a romance. I'm not afraid of romances. It's a science fiction romance, so that's what made me get it. Um, and it is much the same. I don't think those are the same movie. And no, I can't remember the titles. And yes, I could probably check my database of movies and see if I can find it.
Let's
I
not. That
probably
seems
could
like
find it pretty quick.
your database, your huge database.
Yes, of thousands and thousands of things. Yeah, I probably have a listing of just Korean language movies, even if it's two things. Um, but 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 there's stuff that's out there. Um, I guess the one the one strange thing to think about is Japanese language stuff that gets out because there's a lot of well, first off, there's a lot that Japanese makes, and there's a lot that the English do we can we call it the Anglosphere? That tends to be the non-French speaking in Canada. We have Anglophone, which is like the English speaking people that live in Quebec, which is our dominantly French speaking province. So the Anglosphere is not the correct term to use for the rest of the world in English speaking. Um, but the English speaking world has a very heavy introduction to Japanese, both Japanese language originals and remakes of stuff from Japan. And a lot of that is like adapted from some comic into a show or a movie or both, and then adapted over here into another movie. And we tend to not even know if it came if that's how it came. So we might know that it's a remake of a movie, or and we might never know that it's from some manga or something. Um, but there's a lot of absolutely astonishing Japanese stuff, specifically science fiction, because I mean, the, their entire society, their civilization is became futurism focused, and a lot of high tech and a lot of imagination comes straight out of Japan, and a lot of the art is very heavily focused on forward facing stuff. So they've got a lot of stuff that deals with robots or modified humans or and a lot of stuff in the future. And a lot of it is very, very gritty because there's a lot of influence that you can feel on the devastation of World War II. Um, and so there's a lot of ruined world stuff that I'm also interested in that exists in Japanese stuff. So you'll get a lot of great movies like Akira is probably the first real introduction that a lot of people had to Japanese stuff. I think the first wildly popular one was Ghost in the Shell, which I recommend. Ghost in the Shell 2 kind of sucked. Um,
You mean
Ghost in the Shell
animated
and
movies,
Akira.
not actual live action?
Uh, there's a live action version, right? And there was a live action English version of Ghost in the Shell recently with what's her face, Pretty Girl,
Yeah.
Scarlett Johansson.
It wasn't bad.
Uh,
I wish I didn't hear the controversies over it, but yeah, it wasn't bad.
I know nothing. I heard bits, but I don't know anything. I stopped. I didn't care. It all that did was remind me that the movie existed, so I went and, went and saw it. And I do wish it was better. I wish it was better. It did not feel right. And maybe that's because the original was that's one of the beauties of animation is you can accomplish things in animation that are literally impossible in reality. And even with computer generated stuff, it just becomes it's still expensive to do a lot of shots um, in computer generated stuff. So certain things still aren't done, but some absolutely preposterous with stuff was done in the actual original cartoon because that was still frame by frame drawn. And there's some scenes in there that were done like that. and it's just crazy the level of quality that's there. Um, so so yeah, there's and most recently, a lot of people are getting uh, more familiar with some of the more. It's not exactly drama stuff, but it's like the fantasy version of Japanese mythology. So, like Princess Mononoke is one of my favorites, as is Spirited Away, and it goes on and on. So, the English speaking world has quite a lot of exposure to the raw version in Japanese of actual films that made it big in Japan and made it big outside of Japan without having to filter through the curated little niche sphere, without having to go through those topical experts. They just made it out here rather large, and that's rather interesting because that's just not a thing for anywhere else really. Um, there's for Canada, there's a tiny smattering of French, but that's extremely rare. Um, so yeah, wow. Okay, so I'm not sure if we have a full length show that we're capable of or not. You were saying we might have to cut it short. You
We
don't know
could.
how true that is.
Maybe, but. Wait, you just want to end
Maybe,
it off
maybe.
there?
No, no, I don't want to end it there. I do have some other stuff I want to talk about. I just want to double check. Um, okay, so I'm gonna I okay, so the corner store down the street had for some reason has this incredible deal on granola bars of all things. And
Okay.
peanuts don't really agree with me, but they have some really nice the like dark chocolate ones. So I just buy a lot of them. I've been eating a lot of it. And I swear I've gained weight over the last month or so. I got a scale and weighed myself. I'm like way overweight now, and it's not like it's just gut. It's just in my gut because a lot of guys that get you know, in middle age we get dad bod, which is everything else can be great, but our on the inside of on the inside underneath our muscle is where we put fat, and specifically around our belly. So we get what's called dad bod. So I got that totally going on now. That's actually quite recently disturbing me, and I think it's directly related to me eating so many. Because I mean, peanuts are really really high calorie, and the peanut oil is really brutal too. Plus the all the sugar that gets paired with chocolate, and these were not. These were meant to be tasty. They weren't meant to be because some granola bars get advertised as being healthy for in one way or another. These didn't. These weren't even trying, and they were tasty, man. They were so good. I was eating them like chips,
I mean,
and
like anything you get, anything that you get your
yeah,
hands on.
basically, yeah. If it's good, I'll take it. Yeah. Um, and so I'm thinking more and more about um, a lifestyle change. And what's interesting is I actually started. I was interested in that angle of self improvement, like the physical self improvement, let's call it vaguely. Um, Starting like 2001 probably. Um, and so I took a bunch of notes through to 2005 ish, maybe as late as 2007. And so I have actual physical notes, well, virtual notes. I have text files of notes of an actual workout routine, as though my past self created a set of instructions for my current self to go through to actually get myself back in shape. It's very strange. So I haven't. So it's like the diarying concept that I've got right, so where you take notes and then you read them later. You actually read them later, and so I've got I, and it's not like anything else you'll ever find online or from any professional or anything. Um, the series of programs that I created that actually go through all kinds of different stuff to know and to do. And it's like I was going through my notes the other day. I'm looking at this thing again. I'm like, oh, yeah, it's my past self, like message in a bottle from the past, from me, for me. So it's like, well, I guess I have, I guess that has to be my life soon. Really weird stuff like of all things, it talks about things like sleep and about mental state and about all it's is nice. So I think I'm going to pursue that stuff. And I've always wondered. Um, I had been thinking of just tidying that up and just publishing it, but I'm wondering if I should tidy that up and create a video series on it while I'm going through it and actually make that a thing because it isn't one of these before and after. This is me on a keto diet, 1,200 calories a day for 6 months. It's not nothing like that where you'd get the side by side picture with slouchy fat person and ripped next person however many years later. It's not nothing like that. It would be the actual full program and philosophy, the methodology and the actual exercises, video after video after video. I'm thinking of doing that, but but it's one thing because I've got um, a series of. So I have a way of getting over shyness, being on camera. So for somebody that who's highly introverted and shy, who wants to do make videos on YouTube, for example, I have a system for getting over that, and it's just leveraging a distance thing, which is something I wanted to talk about earlier about how people act differently online because of distance. Like you wouldn't talk face to face the way that you would talk online. Even if you are aware that you are a different person, you still things are just wrong, and some people just get polluted, and maybe that's their only kind of socialization is this distance online. In person, you'd get socked for talking in certain ways. It's or there would at least be the implicit threat, and that would be enough to make a person polite. And there's other problems that minimize that threat and also make people more hostile than they ought to be, more disrespectful, let's say. Um, and there's a version of that if you wanted to make videos for yourself online where you just delay your video by a certain amount of time and don't read comments, for example. And a person who's shy won't get the immediate feedback and will become distant because a video when it schedules to be released for each day, a video that appears online that they can watch themselves before they confirm that it should go live. And then, but the thing is, you're watching a message in a bottle from a version of you that doesn't exist. Right? It's from the past. It's some other. It's a person that you used to be, but and in terms of a workout, it's weird because if I were to work out and, for example, I'd be shy about taking my shirt off, let's say, and but if I were to do that, have my shirt off and have fat old me doing push-ups and struggling, right? And if I were to do that and video it, I wouldn't want to show that live because like that's embarrassing, right? The entire thing is an embarrassment. The flaw, the the failure. But if I were to video that and not do anything with it, and then in 6 months review it and compare that to what I am now, the success that I've had in between, the obvious success would make it um, would distance me from the embarrassment because That's not me. Like, that's some other old version. That's a time capsule. That's a portal to somebody that does not exist anymore, and I can put that up and not be embarrassed because I've already I've won. I've beat that. I'm somebody else now. And just like being shy about putting your mug on video and putting that up, if you delay it by a certain amount of time, you improved since then. And there's a kind of detachment that lets you recognize that you are better than whatever the heck that is. And you become very thick skinned to commentary on it. And people that get commentary to stuff that they made yesterday can be very painful. Uh, and again, this is meant for a certain kind of person who's very shy, who's risk averse, etc. And the equivalent of the workout thing might be if I force a schedule a certain way, I will for every day know I will be threatened by the release of a video. And if I don't improve by then, I will definitely be embarrassed. So that future, even though I could change my mind, just go, no, no, I'm not doing this anymore and not release anything. But there is a challenge there where the harder I work is the more likely I am to release that old version of stuff because I will have improved over that time. So there's an idea that I've had in there about talking about this kind of self-improvement stuff, because in the early 2000s, I can't even say that I was really big into it, but I took a lot of notes about the stuff that I was researching, the stuff that I was experiencing, um, you know, just people I was paying attention to, with stuff I was doing, and it seems very appropriate now that, like, I'm getting into my middle age, settling into my dad bod, and I probably shouldn't. And I've got a good opportunity. I've got some time, and it's not like you need tools. I don't need to go to a gym. I don't think anybody should ever go to a gym for any reason unless you're there to socialize, I guess. And some people go to the gym to show themselves off. I think it's an ego thing. I went to the gym and I actually had a tour from somebody and tried all the machines, and I could only find I have a flag in my head that said that there were only 2 machines that did something that I couldn't do with body weight alone, that I didn't already know how. Um, and so there's basically no point in a gym, and in fact, it's a disincentive to go to a gym for a lot of people because of the embarrassment thing, because you're there in real time showing your failure, and being able to do it from home. And um oh, I hear people at my door. We might have to end it.
Just
I might
continue
have
the
people
train of
come
thought.
over.
I'm gonna go deal with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm hearing the door knocking. I'm hearing the door knocking a lot. Okay, so I'm going to keep talking while he's away dealing with company. Um, so so yeah, the dad bod thing is it's interesting. So with men, because they put weight on underneath the muscle, it's possible for us to have moderate definition of the musculature that's still visible while there's like a belly. So you might say something like beer gut, right? So you got it's an actual thing where the musculature it exists and it's firm and it's capable, but it's on the outside of a fat strangling intestinal area, and so everything else could be pretty good. And until a man gets to some certain point, and it's going to be different for everybody, um, the fat doesn't really start accumulating on the outside of the muscle. And that will smooth everything out and give, extra surface area, right? Um, so so I've got the gut thing happening, and one of the problems that people face is they'll look at a problem area and they'll say, okay, well, for example, I've got a belly and I want to get rid of the belly. Therefore, I should do lots and lots of sit ups. The sit ups will work the abs and that will magic, right? But that's wrong. That's literally technically wrong. Okay. Because what you'll do is for a man can do that, and man can actually improve the musculature. And so he'll get better definition, assuming that he's below that critical threshold, whatever it is for him, where the fat on the outside of the muscle, where that fat isn't there yet or isn't bad. So a man can do a bunch of sit-ups and get good-ish definition for abs, but the belly won't go anywhere because the two ideas of targeted effort, so targeted muscle improvement, is different from the idea of weight loss, of fat reduction. So it is a general diet, general overall activity. It's a kind of a calorie issue to get rid of belly fat. It's not a sit up issue. And this is hard to get through to people's heads where the fact that you are using the muscles in that area doesn't necessarily make the muscles in that area look better, doesn't make that region smaller, doesn't use localized fat, for example, because I think that's something that a lot of people still believe. So you do sit ups, burns calories, and it burns calories from the fat in that area, none of which is actually, that's not how any of it works. Just because you're working out doesn't mean it does mean that you're using calories because you have to use calories to move, to perform work, but that doesn't mean that you're using calories from fat ever during any exercise at all, ever. The state that you have to be in order to begin pulling calories out of fat is not effort related. It's not work related. So you can have a brutal workout every day and not be pulling energy out of fat because your body will prefer to use energy out of its regular mechanisms. So you work out in the afternoon, your body's going to prefer to get the calories out of what you've been consuming for breakfast and for lunch. And for you to to consume through that and get into the calories from fat, you do literally have to exhaust your body into the kind of desperation to reach for the freezer food to get stuff out of fat. The fridge freezer model is something that I was I kind of knew about. I think a lot of people kind of understand this, but it's been described. There's a YouTube video that I'm not going to look up right now, but fridge freezer, if you go and research that stuff, it is possible for you to bump into a video that talks about diet and weight loss and the fridge freezer, which is you can think of the fridge being stuff that's easy for your body to get. So it might not be free floating in your blood, but it's really easy to get to. And the freezer is fat. And if your goal is to get stuff from the freezer, you would have to have nothing in the fridge, which is pretty brutal, or you'd have to have a different delivery system for energy that geared itself towards fat because there's no fridge at all. Just it's obsoleted. It's not because you've burned through, because what you do when you burn through your fridge, your your day's worth of calorie intake, let's say, is you'll get tired. You'll get tired and your body will use um, less calories before it starts pulling from fat stores. And that kills a lot of people for energy in terms of what they motivation and energy for actually working out. So things kind of get really, really tough. Um, so the trick is to bypass the entire fridge concept, and this is where a ketogenic diet comes in. And I know that there's a lot of hype about keto, and like for example, there's the lion diet, but you don't have to go to any of that. One of the I can't call it tried and true, but one of the well established, reasonably popular keto diets is Atkins. And the Atkins is it is not a diet at its face. Okay. So you don't go from you right now to an Atkins diet. That's not how it works. You go from you right now through several phases, and the Atkins diet has a kind of program of it depends, right? But I've heard a good 12 weeks with certain stages of you changing your diet to actually get into a state at the end of it, and that is the actual Atkins diet right at the end. So it's not going from you to that is the equivalent of a crash diet, and it's never a good idea just to do what I do and just change your diet and see what happens. Because usually, um, you can even do your body might do the opposite of what you expect for all you know. You kind of need to ease into a lot of stuff. And part of that is psychology and getting rid of things like cravings. You'd be really surprised if you start cutting out sugar from your diet. Carrots are sweet. And it's not a joke that like a lot of our like fruit is actually fruit is awesome once you've stopped eating like potato chips, for example, will have sugar on them uh, depending on what you get. Even if it's an artificial sweetener, that's still the experience of sweetness that kind of psychologically trains you, and nudging your way up through your regular diet and just kind of like eating through your grocery stores until your pantry doesn't have entire classes of food anymore. Okay, so I was talking about the fridge freezer concept and getting your body to consume fat. And one of the ways is by having nothing in your body's fridge anymore. And the keto diet does that. It does that in a really, for most people, including dietitians, it's a surprising thing because your body doesn't necessarily need to have, okay, I'm not going to say you, I'm going to say there are humans who, for centuries or millennia, don't have insulin as part of their body's mechanics. Their body doesn't produce insulin because it doesn't need to produce insulin because their body doesn't because they do not have the materials in their diet that would need insulin to begin the process to extract energy. And that's because their diet consists solely of the well, their diet is ketogenic. So their diet is made up of no sugar and no carbohydrates whatsoever. And in the cases of the two people that I'm thinking of, the two peoples, call them ethnicities if you like, um, they don't eat vegetables either because they both live in permafrost regions, or mostly permafrost. So one is in the north of Canada, called the Inuit, where they live in igloos, they live in permafrost, snow everywhere. They have their primary source of food is from whales and seals, and so um, they eat flesh and fat, and that's it. They don't. There's no vegetables anywhere, right? There's no grain. There's no fruit. There's nothing else, and they're not dead. Okay, so there are humans that do that that aren't dead. The next are the Sami, and they are They're in the north of the Nordic regions in that area, so you're looking at northwestern Europe, and um, they herd reindeer, and that's all they eat. And I don't know if they have touches of anything else because the reindeer obviously they do eat plants. They themselves do eat plants, and so there is access to planty stuff for the Sami as well. I just don't think they eat any of it. They don't grow anything themselves, for example. They don't trade for anything. And again, they've been doing this for we don't know how long. They don't know. They don't have a written history or anything like that. It is older than writing for them to do that. I don't know if their language even has a written form. Um, and so there are humans who have survived like that for forever. That does not mean that an everyday person can do that. There have been people. I know that there was one guy, and I'm not going to look him up because I don't know specifically, who actually went and lived for it was either 6 months or a year with the Inuit, just to live like them. And he didn't die. Now, that doesn't mean that it's a good idea to either eat like that or live with them. It doesn't mean that it's possible for you to go from a healthy version in your society to that, and it doesn't mean that you can go from your terrible version to that. It doesn't mean that you'll improve doing that, right? So it doesn't mean you'll survive. So there's a lot of uncomfortable conversation that has to happen over whether or not it's a good idea. Maybe being born into that culture and living like that is fine for those people, but an adult from outside of that culture doing that might never you might not you might not have the long healthy lifestyle that they would have. We don't know any of that stuff. However, we do know a lot about the science. And the science is real good on eating like no sugar, so no simple sugar whatsoever. No carbs, so no complex, no simple carbohydrates of any sort, and next to no vegetables. Um, and you live. And there are people that do that right now, and they're not dead. And they get blood work done, and their blood work is fine. And they may have had issues that have physiological or allergic, whatever issues that have pushed them towards this is an extreme, push them towards this extreme, and they're not, and they're better. They're better than they were. They feel better than they were. Right? Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to live as long as like a healthy person without their issues in the first place. It doesn't mean that they would, like, we don't know. There's a lot of stuff we don't know. So, and subjecting an everyday overweight but healthy person to diet like that, a fundamentally biologically transformative diet like that, who knows? However, there's a whole lot of stuff we know about um, our non-ketogenic everyday person from previous generations of humans before we had candy bars, right? Which is we know about hunger, we know about fasting, we know that the 3 meals a day thing that's an invention. That's an invention, just like childhood is an invention. It's not an actual natural normal thing in reality. The guarantees of like the manufactured life of these things, the timing, the scheduling, that's not reality. And you yourself, even though you may not be an Inuit or a Sami, are still in a culture that came from a history of humans surviving perfectly well with other things that happen. So, for example, there's the phrase, don't spoil your appetite. And when's the last time you were hungry before you ate? Like, actually hungry. Some people aren't hungry when they eat, they just eat because it's time to eat. And if they get hungry, they snack. So they'll go through their day and they won't really experience hunger. And things like you'll hear all kinds of stuff, right? So, for example, the food pyramid. And I know in the United States they use that. In Canada they use that. And the general agreement is you have like your base is carbohydrates, all right, and it goes up to vegetables and meat at the top, and you throw your dairy in or whatever the heck else your little triangle looks like. And that's exactly opposite to how humans have normally lived, which is hunting gathering, which is the base of where humans came from, and um, then farming, and then stuff that is seasonal. So your fruit, year-round fruit is ridiculous. It's not a thing. And a whole lot of things that people eat are not year-round. And it's it's not necessarily true that the best way for you to eat is the way that humans used to eat, because it may well be that you are way better off eating the fullness of what's possible for humanity to achieve now, which is utterly impossible earlier. So, like having apples all year round was just not a thing. Um, and so, who's to say that you shouldn't eat apples all year round? Because now that we can, maybe that is the best thing to do. There's a lot of stuff like that where it is not necessarily knowable. However, fasting. Fasting is really interesting, as is all kinds of weird calorie restriction stuff. And the notion of not eating but not going hungry is something that people do and people will swear by and people will use uh, as a kind of it's weird. It's like your the human body is really incredibly hardy, and people act in a certain way and are averse to not having the comforts that are around us all the time. It's one thing for a dieter to say, "Well, I'm not going to eat dessert anymore." But it's another thing entirely for a person to choose to not eat for 2 weeks straight, even though they're surrounded by food that's convenient and even quote unquote healthy to one degree or another. And knowing that life will suck for a few days as a start. Um, and I fasted for 24 hours, and that's not comfortable, right?
Wait, was the fasting just cuz,
But
or you had to
imagine
do it for drawing
doing that
blood?
for a few days. I did blood work a couple of times, and the first time I was told to fast for 24 hours, and the second time I thought I needed to, but I turns out I didn't. So I just suffered for no reason. I got there and I actually asked, and they're like, "No, no, you didn't need to." Like, because they were doing like blood sugary stuff or whatever the heck from the first one, checking for diabetes and all that fun stuff. Um, and apparently, so I fasted before, and I've also switched diets to be beef only, which is apparently a little bit different than keto only. Um, and I've explored with all that kind of stuff. And not you're definitely not going to die if you eat nothing for potentially a long time. And I'll have to get into that because it's actually not true. Um, and you're certainly not going to die if you eat badly for a few days or nothing at all for a few days. But I do, before anybody does anything dumb about fasting, because that has to be addressed, because people don't understand fasting. Fasting is not eating anything. It's more than that. It's not eating some stuff. It still is not eating, but what happens is, so you still need calories to live, right? To live, let alone move. Okay. But so if you fast, what happens is your body will eventually consume all of the sugars that are in it, all the simple stuff that it can get at until the fridge runs dry. and it has to reach for the fats. And then it switches over to the keto state where it starts there's another energy mechanism where fat is the source. If you eat fat, like if you the Sami or the Inuit and you switch to a diet like theirs, your body will also take that from the outside. So grab it from the inside, from your own fat stores, and from the outside from what you're eating. If you don't get anything from the outside, all it has is what's inside. It reaches for two things. It reaches for fats and it reaches for protein. And if it reaches for your protein, you're going to die. So that's what kills you. If you just don't eat, that's what's going to kill you because you'll have like multiple organ failure. Just bad things happen. So you can't starve to death. That's a thing. Humans have been doing that for a long time. And so if you fast, you're going to die. Okay. So one of the curious things about fasting is if you this is going to sound wrong, but I swear there's science behind this. I just don't understand it well enough to repeat it rote. So I'll describe some of it. So if you if your body no longer has, let's just blanket say has no insulin in it anymore because you've consumed everything that needs insulin and insulin is worthless. So your body just stops making it and it flips into a ketogenic diet. In between, your body's freaking out. So you get something called a keto headache. By most people will call it that. So life's going to suck for a little bit while your body goes, well, I don't understand what to do. And then it switches into this other type. It's this technically more efficient type of system and it starts pulling fats out. That's not good enough because it starts reaching for other stuff too. And the other stuff happens to be real easy to get to break down protein, which is why if you fast or if you have a keto diet, you actually need to work out on purpose. And it's not that easy, but you work out because when you work out, you create human growth hormones. That's the stuff that'll make your muscle grow bigger when you work out. But the advantage is when that hormone is in your body, your that actually is and that is what is consumed before muscle. So your body will grab fat and that and will when you work out you will actually be protecting your muscle from being consumed by this mechanism. So if you laze around and don't eat, you'll die. And that's why you die. But if you have comfortable long walks, if and I'll get into further, then you have protected your muscles, your organs. And so your body will just use fat and that. But there's two other things to think about. So one is you produce human growth hormones and anybody that's doing like bodybuilding and some serious exercise understands you got to have the pain to shred your muscle, to have the growth hormones, to have everything heal up and get bigger afterwards. That's not what you want to do. You want to do enough to have the growth hormones be there. You don't necessarily want to shred and damage your muscle, but you do really want the hormones. But there's another thing to think about that is stress. And this is why most people shouldn't fast, and this is why most people shouldn't get on the keto diet, is the stress hormone. Yeah, I wish I could remember it off the top of my head. I cannot remember, but it's produced under anxiety and all this other stuff. So it is literally nicknamed the stress hormone. Oh man, I'm just going to look that up real quick. What is it called? Cortisol. That's right. Okay. So if your body has cortisol in it, that material specifically messes with essentially the efficiency of all of this. So life's going to suck. You're not going to have decent energy if you've got stress in you, which is everybody all the time because that's what life is. So eliminating stress by chilling out, by having a straightforward lifestyle, by whatever psychological tricks, whatever actual environmental tricks, reduction in cortisol is absolutely important, absolutely critical. And the other is you act is if you work out, you produce cortisol. Okay, so so life sucks. So what you need to do is you need to produce as much human growth hormone as possible while not producing while producing as little cortisol as possible. And there is only one way of doing that with one big caveat, which is you pursue you can't like go for jogs, you can't go hiking, you can't like do the little just like low rep workouts, none of that stuff. Because those efforts sustained just produce more and more cortisol over that sustained length of time, even though it produces more and more human growth hormone over that sustained length of time. But what you really want to do is called HIIT, um, high intensity interval training. And it is it will destroy you. It's 15 minutes of hell, and it is meant to be the most intense, brutal, terrifying stuff packed in as short a period of time as possible. And it obliterates everything about you until you're just one exhausted lump. And so it requires a huge amount of psychological dedication. So it's not for everybody. Or like right away, it's not for everybody. So this is all of this train of thought is all manner of not for everybody. And because it's in such a period of time, it that produces a lot of growth hormone, but it only produces that length of time of cortisol, not a whole lot of intensity. So it's actually a good balance of a huge amount of human growth hormone and not much cortisol. And the thing about human growth hormone is it sticks around in the body for maybe 2, 3 days if you do HIIT. So theoretically speaking, um, and in practice for a lot of people, is if there's a high intensity interval training every 2 to 3 days, that's 15 minutes every 2 to 3 days, while having a low stress lifestyle, good luck with that. Um, the combination of these things produces enough of the growth hormone that it protects the musculature, and you're getting a good workout. So you're actually being in reasonable shape, even though it's not quite, HIIT twice a day, every day is maybe what some people might do, right? Or more than that, if you're a movie star, you're getting fit for playing Batman or whatever the heck. People do some insane stuff. You do HIIT, but for an hour and a half well, 3 times a day, 4 times a day. The just the amount of effort necessary to go from nothing to completely ripped in 6 weeks. I've seen it. It's ridiculous. So an actual proper keto diet involves a tailored diet with no sugar, no carbs, which is really hard. Not necessarily any veggies, but you probably need it. You might need supplementation as well just to be safe. And again, that's not for everybody because who knows if an everyday human being can work like somebody who's from a culture that's always been like that, who's born and raised like that. Then it has to be somebody who um, can be low stress and do the HIIT. And the thing about doing the HIIT is you have to be able to you have to already have a body that can handle 15 minutes of hell, which if you are really fat, it's not you because you're going to wreck your joints because it's a brutal amount of work. So your knees aren't going to be able to handle it, for example. So it kind of sucks. And a lot of people have them like just being overweight and having the psychology of it and dealing with all this is stressful. So there's your cortisol. So it's like there are a lot of people who swear by it, who've done it for a long time, and maybe they found their success, found the groove, calmed down. They they found their self-esteem. The diet was easy enough for them to get into. Like they still enjoy life, even though eating is kind of a not not pleasurable like it was anymore. I don't find that to be true because I love all kinds of flavors of beef jerky, for example. But you don't eat cake anymore. Maybe they were healthy enough, young enough that they could do the workouts and the long, comfortable walks that are necessary for good life is something they were already doing, and right? So it's absolutely not for everybody. So it really is a fad that could do serious harm to the wrong sort of person who doesn't understand, for example, it's not just a diet. You actually have to do the correct amount of exercise. You actually have to have a low stress life. And these are the things that a lot of people they'll just see before and after pictures and somebody saying, I had X number of calories and I eat keto, and this is me 6 years later, or whatever the heck. You go, I want to do that too. But that infographic doesn't tell you the rest of the stuff that needs to happen, or you die. Um, this is, yeah, I can't stress it enough. Um, it's really, yeah. So this was not a part of the research from my original like health exercise program that I started doing in like 2001. Started writing, not following. I was doing some of it by instinct and just recording it like a diary, like a journal as I was doing it. Then I kind of forgot about it, lost it in notes. This diet thing was not part of that research. It's just very, very recent because it was this big fat, no pun intended, big fat trend. Um, and it's something I looked into often enough, deep enough to actually get some actual for realsies science. And enough of the science is indisputable that people could piece the stuff together that there's no more the poo-pooing of the mainstream like dietitian stuff. They no longer have the smug that's all just a bunch of made up fat. It's no, there is now absolute hard science behind it, not just anecdotal people that happen to have survived this stuff. Who oh yeah, there's this institute in Russia, and that's how they cure people, and there are people that had cancer and no, it's none of that. It's actually people taking a look at the actual biochemistry of it and studying humans and actually understanding how all these parts of the energy delivery mechanisms work. And and by the way, we've got the Sami and the Inuit, and they're not dead. So, like, some humans can do it, and but it's not for everyone. Definitely not for everyone. So, I would say talk to your doctor, but I would also say do a stupid amount of research because your doctor probably doesn't know, probably isn't on the cutting edge of bioscience. Um, and the
Well,
problem is this is not something you kind of dabble with because you're not going to get results just by trying this for
well, if you're gonna talk to anyone, talk to a specialist because your doctor, a GP, is a general practitioner. He knows a bunch of things, but not specifically certain
yeah,
things.
yeah, like your doctor, what your family doctor has expertise in is looking stuff up really quick and like not telling you that they're looking stuff like when they're just typing in their records, they're actually looking through a database to figure out what the hell what they're supposed to be saying. um that not only is your family doctor not going to know anything about anything, because I mean your family doctor might still be using the 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 food pyramid, which is just this weird debunked pseudoscience stuff from from farms that say, well, we need to sell more wheat, so wheat's really important. um your family doctor, if you talk to a dietitian as a person who specializes in this stuff, that person's probably not gonna know a damn thing. In most places a dietitian isn't like a real thing, not really. In Canada, and maybe it varies per province, but I do know in at least in the when I've looked at it, it does have to have certification, but it doesn't mean that there's hard science behind it, and it doesn't mean that these people are up to date. I did talk to one woman, and she's a dietitian, and she doesn't know any of this. She'll tell you all about cholesterol, like she's a real expert. I kind of vaguely understand cholesterol now. So yeah, I guess. But will she understand anything about what I just talked about other than like she'll express concern over crash dieting because she'll know about that stuff, but she won't know about the biochemistry of how this stuff works. Um, she will not have even heard of the fridge freezer concept, and she won't know about. By the way, if you eat a paleo diet, it eliminates the need for insulin. It completely eliminates the problems of type 2 diabetes. Only type 2, not type 1. It's just gone. It doesn't cure it because if you stop that diet, the type 2 diabetes just comes back. So it doesn't let you eat cake, um, but you don't need insulin anymore. I would still have insulin on you and all that kind of stuff. But if you want to save, if you're American and you want to save money because you're type 2 diabetic and insulin costs money, change your diet. Maybe your diet will cost more than you might think, but believe it or not, your junk food probably costs a lot. So if you stop eating the sugary stuff, you're probably going to save a lot of money that way, as well as not needing. Well, you should have insulin because it will save your life if you screw something up, right? You still need to test your blood and all this kind of stuff, but you can actually just save money doing eating better, strangely enough. But um, I mean, some people just aren't willing to do that. They'd rather spend the money on insulin and still eat cake, which is fine. And that's which is,
Tampers
I
off
mean,
slowly.
with all the hmm? Well, I
Nothing,
mean,
Gary.
but live fast, die young kind of thing. That's fine. I mean, if insulin empowers a person to live the life they want to live happily, so be it. But if it's like just a price thing, if it's a cost thing, and I say American because man, the prices for some of the stuff in the United States are absolutely outrageous. Like they people diabetics have to go through some weird tricks and say certain things. They're like, oh, if you say this, you can get insulin from Walmart and you can get it, and it's this price. And I don't. Well, I may as well address that right now. Don't do that kind of stuff without understanding, because insulin is not insulin is not insulin. And in the United States, they have like classes of insulin, and some people require a certain. Some people have died because they've taken the wrong insulin because they were trying to save money. Um, and I mean, you might go, haha, stupid American, which is really easy for Canadians to do. But it's because they didn't understand that the brand and the names of on their insulin really did mean something, and they are they are their biology is tied to needing a certain quality or intensity of insulin, however it works. And I can't advise on that because I'm not a diabetic and I'm not American and I don't know the industry. But yeah, eating like paleo is the diet that people point at, and I don't know enough about that to talk about it. But it's a keto diet as well, and switching to something like that because it literally like your body doesn't produce insulin because insulin isn't good for anything anymore because nothing in your body insulin wouldn't do anything in your body because there's nothing for insulin to process. So your body just goes, and doesn't produce it anymore. And you don't die because it does this other stuff. And that other stuff is easier for your body to do. So it's real happy, but it's lazy. As soon as you introduce sugar again, it just drops everything. It flushes your system. You eat a single like mint in you eat for some people it's more than 25 carbs a day is about the break point. I think there's a certain number of carbs in a meal in a sitting. So if you decide to eat a slice of pie one day, your body just flushes everything associated with the other your superior primordial energy system. just latches on to the traditional one that uses insulin. And then you're essentially wrecked for a few days because you might be dumb enough to only eat the keto stuff, to continue only eating the keto stuff, and now you're starved of all the rest of the stuff that your body really does need. Now that it's switched to the insulin based stuff, you need the rest of a good balanced diet and your veggies and all. You need all of that. Whereas on a keto diet, for some reason you don't die even though you're missing fundamental um, vitamins. Like if right now your diet excluded vitamin C, you're dead. If it's excluding vitamin, etc., that's why we describe them as vitamins, vital. Um, Exclude any of them and you're dead. It might be slow, it might be a slow death, but you will die. But in a keto diet that is absent of some of those things, you'll live. So it's weird. So you'd have to, it's all or nothing. If you're keto, then whatever is in the food you eat is whatever your body needs. And it literally doesn't need all this other stuff that we know the body needs. But as soon as you introduce like too many carbs, some sugar, whatever the heck, your body switches over to this new thing. You better have the rest of that balanced diet like right away, or you're the equivalent of fasting for the next until your body figures its stuff out again. You're the equivalent of fasting for 3 days. Your body is just really messed up. So, what some people do is they do keto during the week and then they eat regular on the weekends and then they go keto again. But that's insanity. I would never recommend that because it takes time for your body to go keto. So you're kind of like wrecking yourself for your Monday, Tuesday, maybe Thursday, maybe Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. You're getting the benefit for a couple of days. So it's kind of like this brutal seesaw. I might extend it for like 3 weeks of keto and then a weekend of whatever the heck, or just know what's going on so that you can eat whatever you want to eat, take a lot of vitamins, and have your birthday cake, and then just know that you're going to be a little messed up for a few days. The keto headache, and then yeah. Are we out of time again?
Yeah, I was just gonna say keep going and then we'll cut it there, but sure, if you want to notice the time now.
What? I don't know. I might like 20 minutes late.
Uh,
I need
you're
like a
like half an
table.
hour
Like we could,
late.
okay, well, I could have stopped earlier probably. Um, so I mean, we can skip this break. Okay, so I did have another note to, so that was me just the word wait, me rambling on about that stuff. Um, I, I mean, I only have one other thing to talk about before we just hit random on Wikipedia,
I
which
mean,
which would be terrible. Um, which is for some reason my computer has been claiming that it's getting ready real soon now. One of these days, anytime now, there's going to be a May 2020 Windows update. I'm like, wait, it's 2020, so I know we're in clown world, but I know it's not May anymore. It's been a little while. Why? What's going on? Because I used to be part of the Windows Insider thing, but in order to be part of the Windows Insider thing, you've got to set yourself up to you set your installation of Windows up to be really creepy and report a lot of disturbing stuff to Microsoft. So I tell Windows to pretend that it's not doing that because that makes me feel better. Because if it does explicitly do that, then it's reporting usage, things like that. Um, so I recused myself of the program. I'm probably using the word wrong. Um, and so there might be some leftover stuff in my setup somewhere where my system thinks that I ought to have been eligible for some trial of something or other, and it's kind of holding back. So there might be some feature update because there's some actual features that are. It's hard to get real update documentation, and I've complained to them Whenever there's an actual feature change in Windows. So there's no so in regular software, in like the open source software world, for example, and basically anywhere, if they want to sell you a new version, they give you a detailed list of bullet points of the things that they've added, the things that they fixed, right? In open source, they just call it a change log. You'll see this if you use something like Discord, where it updates every other day, and occasionally it'll brag about how many cool things it's done. And Windows doesn't do a good job of doing that, but there's some really there's some stuff that gets added in occasionally. Like there's a I think it's Windows print screen does nope. Aha. Nope. It's
It's just Shift
what
key.
would you like to turn on high contrast? No, well, it wasn't that
Oh,
combination of stuff. Um, but and of course I can't demonstrate it.
or you can't get it to work.
Okay, well, whatever. So there's actually some new screenshotting, screen clipping tools that got put in to specify windows and draw arrows, draw areas and stuff like that. Is this the stuff that was cooked into OS 10 from like 2007 or something? So Microsoft is getting around to it just now, but knowing that that stuff gets put in is, I mean, you have to read through their notes, and it's not obvious even how to get to that stuff. So I was looking at this new feature, this May 2020 update, and it's like a media update, so it makes updates to the quote unquote apps. I don't know why they're calling them apps. So the photo software and the video software and all this kind of stuff. And it's just a lot of it is just garbage, but some of it is kind of neat. Um, I still think Windows is a toy. I came from using Linux full time, insisting on it, doing it the hard way, um, to using Windows just as kind of my virtual machine host, and I use it for playing games, just so I don't have to. Even though more and more video games are being released on Linux natively, thanks to the Vulkan engine, um, and being fully capable, like 100% fully capable. Um, Even though that's happening, I'm not going to be using. I'm going to still use Windows um, full time as my host and just virtual using VirtualBox. And there's a seamless mode where I can actually drag around Linux GUI applications in Windows and have them like be regular Windows applications. Alt tabbing doesn't work properly because of reasons, but it works well enough doing this. I've got two monitors, so I just have like my right hand side tends to be Linux most of the time. It's easier than dual booting, and it lets me do fancy Linuxy stuff while dealing with Windowsy stuff. Um, and I like that. And I brought that up because the Microsoft introduced something called Windows Subsystem for Linux, which is a Linux subsystem for Windows, and they are soon going to be redoing it. I already use it. It's just a toy. I don't know why I even have it because I've got virtual machines, but I don't need a virtual machine. I tied a hotkey to open up a terminal window. So I don't even need a virtual machine to have access to a decent enough Linux, and with a because I've talked about this before. So I've got another tool called Xlaunch, and Xlaunch is an unofficial tool that lets me run Linux GUI applications within Windows Subsystem for Linux. So I can run my favorite Linux text editor, or I can run. I mean, theoretically speaking, I could have like a Firefox running in Windows Subsystem for Linux, just if I want the Linux version of it for some reason. Anyhow, so that stuff all exists, but Microsoft is actually making a Windows native kernel, and I don't know what that really means. So it's a a much tighter integrated kernel of Linux made. custom for Windows, which I mean, I don't know what they think they're doing because there's no point because it's not like I need performance. It's a Linux shell with Linux console tools. They're it can't be slow. It's Linux. So I don't know what they're trying to accomplish with that other than trying to eliminate like push out the Linux native stuff and kind of own the kernel and probably knowing them not share their modifications because they're jerks. I've said this before, but we have not published me ranting about Microsoft. I hate Microsoft. I hate you. I use
Thank you.
Windows, but it's an abusive
No, we
relationship.
did.
Hmm?
Oh, publish. Never mind.
Published, yes. I have talked about privately about my thoughts on Microsoft. I reserve some of my strongest language for Microsoft. Uh, anyhow, so I'm kind of out of stuff to talk about. Um, I mean, yeah, yeah. Okay, so do you do you really want to try Wikipedia random? See what
There's.
happens?
What time is it even? Not
Do
bad.
we have? We have
Yeah, we
like
can
20
quit like
minutes.
half an hour early.
Do you want to quit now? Okay,
Yeah, it seems
so
like a
we're
good
still
ending stopping point.
okay. So let's do a small chatty teardown and keep recording.
Okay. Well, stopping the stream. Thanks for joining.
Might be some interest.
Wait, what?
Oh, I meant keep recording. Are
So,
you there?
I am here. Do we stop?
What is this? What is the status of the stream?
The stream and the recording are still ongoing.
Good. Okay, because that's what I wanted. Okay, so
Not touching
so
anything.
we still have what?
I'm not touching anything then.
Okay. So the problem remains of how to have content in a podcast. And that is a general problem that other podcasts have tackled. So one thing is this is more. I mean, should it be my thing? Should it be my problem to solve? Um, researching the the other podcasts that are out there, popular or not, to see how they format themselves, how they have content. Maybe the fact that we're on for this long is just too long, and that's a problem. Maybe it should only be a certain other length of time because that's what other people do.
I mean,
But
there's. From what I can tell, it's three factors in certain things. If it's live or a recording, then. Well, if it's live, it somewhat matters. If it's. Because there's a possibility you could have. You could interact with audiences if there
mhm.
are some. Um, and if it's recording, then at that point it doesn't matter because you could just listen to it at any time or stop or skip what if you don't like it or if it just it depends it
Well,
depends on the topic, but some people most people might just listen to and gain insight into it. It's what I hope. So it
okay,
just
so
depends.
I'm not sure if that helped me
No,
with
it
my
didn't.
question. So my problem is having stuff to talk about. So having less time makes whatever we talk about um, like we need less ideas. So learning from the successes and mistakes of others is one valuable thing. So examining other podcasts, preferably fairly long running podcasts, but it could be ones that are just over and seeing how they do things, how they format things. I am not comfortable with just grabbing news topics, which is what a lot of people are doing. I think it's a I think it's just a toxic way of doing things because too many people are being drowned in every other person interpreting the news of the day. And it's just I sometimes there's enough of that, right? You could say from a perspective of competition is there's enough. It's a saturated market, you can say. So the question is, if that stuff is off the table, then what else is there? Okay? If it's we could not go through the headlines for newspapers or for whatever the heck and chat about those things. There's like pointless Hollywood star gossip, but that's not my thing. Um, so the question is, how how is it possible to have enough things to talk about at every opportunity, given that we have X amount of time and given that we talk uh, twice a week, right? Which is maybe every other podcast is only 1 hour long and once a week, right? And we have that much more to cover. Like I can talk for forever as long as there's stuff to talk about.
So,
So,
three categories of should talk about, could talk about, and if and filler.
well, I don't care about necessarily categorizing it, but what how would we build a list? So I'm taking my little notepad, I'm jotting down random ideas. And so, I mean, I can talk about the raised bed thing um, with the gardening stuff and other things that are happening in my life, so long as that's actually interesting enough to talk about. But and as long as there are no people popping in who are asking questions or this kind of stuff, when we're self-generating ideas, um, when we're doing it all on our lonesome, unprompted, we need to be able to have I'm stuff might not pop into my head, right? Talking about my life could be boring, or it could just be I could run out of stuff to talk about because I've already talked about everything, and then I just be talking about what I've done since the previous show, which is not going to be 3 hours
Entertaining.
of stuff, right?
Oh.
Right. So
Uh,
so I mean, I could talk about my last months like that, but I can't talk about my last couple of days every couple of days. That I will eventually be caught up. So the question is, where do you get material from? And for a fiction writer, I I can do that for forever. As a writer, I can do that for forever. But as a speaker, it's something else. Um, what I do because I have done my own streaming. I paused my own streaming efforts for this, although I had taken a break for some time before this. Is I would read stuff. I would read stuff off, and if people popped in or something, I might chat about something, or the story might prompt me to talk about some element of the story. And that's it. I'm not going to run out because I've got however many pages, right? I just read for an hour or something and talk about it as I go. Especially reading fairy tales is the most comical thing because they're just awful in terms of literature. They're not good. In terms of storytelling, they're terrible. I mean, they're comically terrible. Man. And so I can do that, but that is my successes with that is very different from this, where I've just gotta I need stuff. I need actual stuff because I can't pull out a book and read about that. And we can't pull out headlines and chat about that stuff necessarily. And so I'm a little bit bothered. So um topic generating websites. Um, right. So I mean that's the problem. That's the problem is running out of steam. So I think that is the biggest problem. So we have today is Wednesday, so we have a few days to figure this problem out by Sunday. And I mean, if we don't, then the show has to get shortened. until we figure out a format, I think. So I do not know how to proceed. So what I ask you is to get expertise or help me understand by examining other podcasts and see how they do things and see if they have interesting things to talk about. And maybe by listening to them, we can be like response audio, some old podcast of somebody or other talking about something. And I could listen to that and get inspiration for talking about something. Maybe that's what I need to do is just be listening to podcasts a few hours a day, which these days I watch and listen to like instructional YouTube videos and stuff like that, like on how to garden. But I can only talk about that so much. Um, so that's the only thing I can think of is listening to podcasts and riffing off of them and learning how they do things. Because I just don't know because I don't listen to podcasts, which maybe I should be embarrassed about that. I've ranted enough, and I guess that's our problem to solve before our next show. And we're gonna end it here, even though it's slightly early. I'm gonna pick this up on Sunday. So you've got your teardown to get this to me,
Yeah,
and
I'm
we'll
gonna
press.
stop the stream now,
Okay.
and then the recording.